starting to talk a lot about, and governments are talking a lot about, online or digital privacy and security. And of course, here in Europe, we have GDPR that has established some guardrails around digital privacy and security. And we may see that be taken up in other places around the world. We'll have to see. But certainly, in the context of data, privacy, security is a very, very big talking point. So on to 5G as promised. And I think this quote from this Qualcomm executive does a really good job of just sizing up what 5G is all about. And it certainly is about connecting things. And we've been talking about IoT and the Internet of Things for a long time. But really, I think 5G is going to multiply that dynamic exponentially. So you may be surprised to know that roundabout every 10 years or so, we tend to get a new generation of wireless connectivity. And so in many ways, 5G is right on time, just on principle. But what you need to understand is that 5G is a really key ingredient to power the digital era of consumer technology and to really empower a lot of the super cool technologies like smart cities, like self-driving vehicles that we just love to talk about and we can't wait to experience as consumers. And so when we start to get into the details of 5G, I think there's a lot here, and you can very, very quickly wade into those technical waters, can't you, with things like spectrum and so forth. But really what you need to know is that 5G really embraces a number of benefits above and beyond 4G of higher speeds, greater capacity, lower latency, and these are really the core benefits. And at CES 2019, I think the excitement around 5G will be palpable because the fact of the matter is we've been talking about 5G and its various benefits and so forth, but there's so much happening right around the world. And there are a group of countries, the US and China included, that are seen as a little bit out in front. For example, in the United States, the wireless carriers AT&T and Verizon have already stood up commercial 5G services. But really, here in Europe, not that far behind, and I would say very, very much in the mix, as well as other places like Canada and Australia. And let's probe a bit deeper here in Europe, and I'll explain exactly what I'm talking about. So, in Europe, the state of affairs related to 5G is, again, there's just so much happening. But across the channel in the UK, Vodafone has its Gigabit UK initiative, which is really all about trials and testing across Tier 1 cities, as you can see listed here, and Tier 2 cities. Here in France, really much of the same across major Tier 1 cities, but there is one difference. There is one difference, and that is that ARCEP, as you may know, which is the French communications regulatory body, they are very, very keen indeed on fostering 5G into the marketplace, seeing that as a commercial enterprise for French citizens, and they've set some ambitious goals, haven't they? So that's one distinction, and a key point is that some countries have a plan, and France certainly has a plan. Other countries like China have a plan. The US, I think we're getting a plan. Which is great, but that's certainly a distinction. So, competitive advantage for France? I think so. In the Netherlands, where we were last week, they're just getting organized around a spectrum auction, and of course those trials will happen really quickly. Now, on to what we expect to see. So really the entire ecosystem of 5G will be in full effect. We'll have carrier initiatives, so if you want to get technical, you can look at millimeter wave and steerable antennas and beamforming, fixed wireless broadband, which is perhaps less talked about, but very important, certainly for large geographically diverse countries like the US, like China. And of course 5G smart devices, smartphones, hotspots, and so forth. All of this will be on the floor for our enjoyment and just education to learn more about what 5G is about and where it's going to be taking place. On to the next trend of artificial intelligence, and this was a major theme of CES 2018, and it'll certainly be that at 2019, but you're probably wondering, what does AI have to do with the steam engine? Well, just this. So, just last month, a few weeks ago, the McKinsey Global Institute, which, as you probably know, McKinsey is a global business consultancy, they released a study that likened the global economic impact of AI to the steam engine about 200 years ago. So is that a profound statement? Yes. Is it a spot-on assessment? I think so. And here's why. Because the study goes on to say that their estimates, going out to about 2030, is that AI will contribute about 1.2% to global GDP. Now, a small percentage, but behind that are trillions and trillions of euro. So there's just so much happening around AI, and we'll see exactly the same manifest at the show in a few short months in January. So from processors and chips, those chips going into devices, we're going to have machine learning and digital assistants. So digital assistants being the most visible part of that spectrum. And related to digital assistants, there were really three things at the show in 2018 that really came to light relative to digital assistants. And these were, first, that digital assistants are going into more vessels, like smart speakers. Second, support for these digital assistants has become table stakes in the industry. And third, voice is what is powering it all. So using our voice to articulate what we want to these digital assistants, and things are starting to happen. So let's unpack all three of those things very, very briefly to just provide a bit more context. And first point on vessels. So looking back over the past 20 years and change of CES, what we've worked out is that there tends to be a must-have product about every 5 or 6 years in consumer tech. And we think this time, that is really the smart speaker. It's very, very popular, massive adoption in the US. We're starting to see an echo of that in China. I think we'll eventually see that here in Europe. And just to underscore the popularity here of the must-have nature, the previous must-have product was the tablet, before that the smartphone, and go way back to 2002 with me, the DVD players. Does anyone still remember DVD players? Yeah, it really wasn't that long ago, but already, things have just moved on so quickly. So on the point of support for digital assistants, the statistics here speak volumes, but what I want to emphasize is that it's not just about devices, it's also about brands, it's about services, so from pizza to airlines, everything in between. This has become huge in marketing, just as huge as it was about 20 years ago, say, to stand up a website and have an online presence. Now you've got to have a voice presence with digital assistants. And third, with voice, this is quickly becoming the go-to user interface. We're starting to see, we've been trained in some ways to use our voice, if you've ever clicked on the microphone, to speak your search terms for Google. But more, we're interacting with these digital assistants, and this skill with the Church of England just underscores how broadly the skill activity is happening. And we're having some pretty deep conversations with these digital assistants, as you can see. I mean, pretty profound questions and so forth, but it all adds up to greater training of the AI, which improves outcomes, which improves results, which makes us more likely to come back to these digital assistants for all kinds of things. So what am I saying? Well, what I'm saying is that I think we're on the tipping point of a major shift in consumer behavior. And the evidence we can see from some research we did back in the summer in the States amongst US online adults that were using digital assistants, and among other questions we asked them, what are you doing? And as you can see here, and by the way, this is only about a third of the list, but so point one is they're not just doing a few things, they're doing a lot of things. The other point is that they are starting to take up these tasks that they would ordinarily use a browser, or maybe they would fire up an app on their phone for. So they're starting to shift these to voice. And one final point on AI, actually I've got two more points. AI is also being used, apart from digital assistants, in a lot of other areas to impact society, and chop this up under tech for good. So I'm looking forward to Jenny Rometty's remarks, and hopefully she'll talk more about IBM Watson's applications in different spaces, but here, really improving the experience for hearing impaired individuals and perfecting closed captioning. So again, training the AI and yielding the benefits for all of us. And the final point on AI is, I just want to make very quickly, is that I think with all this automation, we're also beginning to understand the limits of that automation. And this was brought into very sharp relief at CES 2018 when Ford featured this vehicle, which was used in a research project to deliver pizzas. It's a self-driving pizza delivery vehicle. They used this in Detroit. And what they found is that they can No problem at all. Get the pizza hot and fresh to the customer's home, but what people weren't willing to do is come outside and collect the pizza. So the technology works, but it just doesn't fit the business model. So the limits of automation. And next, we'll talk about AR, VR. And these two technologies are really on different market journeys, as you can see. And this is another one of those key trends in technology that really starts to play out over a number of years. But innovation is happening really quickly here in AR. We've got all kinds of AR hardware advancements, both in wearables and more in discrete and then more non-discrete. So these music glasses are really interesting because they're very different from Google Glass. They just look like sunglasses. And then smart mirrors really changing the nature of the game in fashion retailing. But also in software. So AR apps, these are starting to stand up more and more and more, and I think this is another usage behavior shift. So like Zara with a virtual model that you can see, much more compelling than a static mannequin. You can actually see the model demonstrate the look. Karen mentioned Sports Zone and AR, VR, all about the fan experience there and amplifying that. And then of course with tourism and education, AR really doubling down on the experience in museums and other historic sites around the world. And what about VR? Well, those of you who have seen Steven Spielberg's movie, Ready Player One, or better, read Ernest Cline's novel, you know that this story is all about the immersive quality of VR, but we're a long way away from Ready Player One experiences, or are we? Or are we? Well, in terms of adoption, I think we've got a ways to go and to wait, because when we're forecasting device markets, oftentimes we're looking for an inflection point, and I think that's still a bit away, sometime in the next decade. But in any case, we'll see ongoing innovation in content and hardware, and that will spur more experimentation and adoption. But there are these Ready Player One type experiences already standing up around the world, like in Japan with the VR zone. So here you can climb a mountain, you can scuba dive, you can drive an F1 race car, you can skydive. A lot of things we wouldn't normally be able to do, we can experience. And consumer brands are really taking advantage of the sense of presence that VR renders and creating brand experiences like this Audi demo here. So a lot of this activity is happening. These technologies are moving in different directions. We'll see that play out at CES. And so the Audi demo is a good segue to vehicle tech. And for vehicle tech, really what we've started to see at CES is it's long been called a show within a show, but really it's a must-see show for vehicles in general because of the focus on tech. And what we've seen over the past couple of years, and maybe even 3 or 4 years, is really a couple of parallel trends here. So you've got a focus on automated driver assistance systems. So these are level 1, level 2, level 0. So think parking assist, blind spot detection, forward collision warning. And then on the other side, you've got more of the level 4, level 5 systems that are the self-driving vehicle, really the full expression of the self-driving vehicle. But what's in between is conditional automation. And we're just starting to see this come to market from manufacturers like Audi and Mercedes-Benz. And this is important because this is the step where we get into a scenario where the car is in charge of the driving task 100% for at least part of the time. And so that's really significant. And so some brands are a little concerned about, well, how can we safely maintain that or facilitate that handoff from the car back to the driver? So I'll be interested to see what vehicle OEMs have to say about that point and how they're ensuring safety. Another narrative around vehicle tech, and this is true throughout the scope of CES, is the business side, where through partnerships, through acquisitions and so forth. Yes, of startups, but also with other major companies banding together to accomplish things. And so it does add up to billions of euros, it does add up to millions of kilometers. And this is just a taste of this, and it's happening globally. So you see a lot of global brands here. So to sum up vehicle tech, I think really it has much to do with CES 2019 about the future of mobility and really where self-driving vehicles fit into a smart city context. And of course, the power plants of those systems, the electrification of vehicles, we'll see a lot of innovation. And there are several companies here in Europe, like in the Netherlands, they have EV Box, that have these really rapid charging systems that are making that charging requirement easier and easier. So smart cities and self-driving vehicles is a good bridge to resilience. And Gary touched on this in his remarks. Karen reinforced that, and it's true. We will have a special focus on resilience. But why? Well, smart cities have been with us for several years, and we've heard that narrative, and we've witnessed those innovations ourselves in many cases. But what we've learned is that whilst we can stand up very, very smart cities, if we don't have resilience, they can be quite fragile. So how do we get around that? How do we work through that? Well, resilience is the answer, and the city of Rotterdam in some ways is a pioneer in this space with their work to maintain resilience, and a lot of this has to do, as we've been talking about data, around cyber resilience. But as Gary mentioned, there's healthcare, there's public safety, and so forth, and in Indonesia, with the tsunami disaster there just last week, I mean, we heard about how the electrical grid went down, and so the text message alert went out, but people didn't get it. People didn't get it. So could there be a better use case for these resilient technologies that can keep people safe when disaster comes, and then more, help them recover? And it's not all about just infrastructure. It's also about really kind of analog, if you think about it, technologies like the GoSun stove, a solar-powered stove. So you're not obliged to chop up your furniture and use it for fuel for a fire. You can use this stove. And last but not least, Karen talked about digital health, and this is really important because I think we can all agree that healthcare costs are accelerating, and we've got to do something about it. And I think that technology is the answer. And really at the salient of innovation when it comes to digital health in a consumer tech context is really digital therapeutics. And these are systems that are complementing existing medical treatment procedures, and this has much to do with the core set of chronic disease like diabetes, and you can see the technology, the insulin pen here illustrated. But really, this is where I think we truly start to, because these are daily requirements from patients that need to perform treatments and so forth. So easing that with technology, but this is where we really start to put a dent into healthcare costs, because these are ongoing, chronic disease treatment scenarios. So let me just close by just reminding you that of the coming data age, all the trends, all the technologies that we'll see at CES are heralds of that coming data age. So as you walk across the floor of CES, I think you'll find data is that common denominator, and more. In certain instances, issues of privacy and security will invariably come up. So I'm excited. I hope you are too, and hopefully this has helped you get CES ready. And now I'd like to invite Gary and Karen back to the stage.